undergraduate to Oakham School, so again, very local connection. And after leaving school, Katherine continued her violin studies. So she plays violin and piano, but she continued her violin studies at the Royal College of Music. She was taught here by John Ludlow and developed a particular interest in the Baroque violin, which she studied with Andrew Manzi, who I'm sure many of you will have heard of. Since leaving music college, Katherine has developed a flourishing career teaching violin, viola and piano, predominantly in Rutland, and has also tutored chamber music and youth orchestras in the region. As well as leading the Rutland Sinfonia, Katherine was leader of Milton Keynes Sinfonia from 1997 to 2002 and has been guest leader of many orchestras in the region. Katherine also plays regularly with the orchestra which accompanies the Oakham Choral Society. Katherine is a passionate advocate of music education and its power to improve the human brain and pupils' academic attainment, and has recently completed further study with the European String Teachers Association. She says, "The evidence speaks for itself. When pupils are given the opportunity to pursue music as part of their daily curriculum, they do better in all of their other studies." So, Katherine, welcome. We will speak a bit more about musical education, hopefully later on in the interview. But to start with, could you just tell us your earliest musical memory, really, and how you began your love of music and your journey into music?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sarah. I'm really excited to be sharing my loves with you all, actually. So my earliest memories were of playing the piano. My mum had always played the piano, although not particularly a lot when we were young. But I had an older sister who was sent off to piano lessons at the age of 6 or so, and I dutifully followed. And my first piano teacher in a very small village in Bedfordshire was a fearsome lady, and she had a grand piano, which I seem to remember was in the upstairs of her house, which seems an extraordinary place to have a piano. But despite her being a very scary lady, I just loved the lessons and just very quickly realised that this was something I could do. I started, I think, when I was 5, and although she was very strict, she was never frightening in that sense. So she gave me a really good grounding for everything that was to come later. So not a specific musical memory as such, but a sort of more general one of how my music education started.
Right, and how did you choose the violin?
Well, that's an interesting one, because before I think I was about 8 or 9, I think we moved from this village to Bedford itself, and my piano teacher had said, there's a very good teacher in Bedford, you must send her to this lady, who at this point was winding down her teaching practice, and felt it necessary to interview me or test me out before she agreed to teach me. So I went along for a trial lesson with her, and she agreed that I was good enough and focused enough that she would teach me. But it quickly became clear to her that she was the one who felt I should go down to London to have my lessons at the junior conservatoire. And but she insisted that I should have a second instrument, as was required at the time. And she also insisted to my mum that I should learn a string instrument. She said I had very good ear and I must learn a string instrument, which was fine because I'd already decided I wanted to learn the cello. Some of you may know that it was always the cello that I had been really interested in. I don't know why, because I'd not played in an orchestra at this point. But my mum asked me, what second instrument would you like to play? I said the cello, and she said, that's fine, we've got a violin in the room. Learn that. So that's how it happened. So it wasn't really a choice in that sense, but just circumstance.
Right.
So
are you glad? Are you glad?
Oh, absolutely, of course. Those moments sitting in the first violins and sort of the soaring melodies. But I have to say that there are frequent moments when the cellos get those glorious tunes, and I just go, oh, that's why I wanted to learn the cello. So there are still moments which I think will also be demonstrated a bit later in one of my choices.
Yeah, I think it's when you go out. It's like when you go out for dinner and you get dinner envy. I think we all suffer a bit from musical instrument envy from time to time. But listen, it's time for your first track, Katherine.
Yes.
So what have you chosen and why?
Okay, so this is the Mozart piano concerto, piano concerto in E flat. This follows on quite nicely from where we just got to, because, as I said, I was lucky enough at the age of about 10 to go down to Trinity College of Music in London for my lessons. I went as a joint first study piano and violinist, and I have been incredibly lucky over the years to have had some fantastic teachers, and this piece reminds me of my piano teacher at Trinity, Kenneth Page. He was a fabulous, generous man, always smiling. And in my last year at Trinity, which was when I was sort of fifth form, 15, we would have hour and a half, 2-hour lessons sometimes. And we had a big room, 2 pianos in there, and this is what we would play. And the joyful conversation between the 2 pianos and his beaming smile looking across at me as we would sort of, work our way through this and some other 2 piano things. But this is the one that brings him back to me.
Oh, how lovely. Right, we're going to hear a little excerpt of it now, hopefully. Right, yeah, so that was the Mozart Piano Concerto in E flat major for 2 pianos. Right, so you obviously decided to apply to the Royal College of Music and got in, Katherine. But at what point would you say that you really knew that you wanted to do music as a career?
I don't think I ever really thought of it in those clear terms. I just knew I just really absolutely had to be playing in orchestras fundamentally. So I started playing in orchestras when I was probably 10, 9, with Bedfordshire Youth Music, and then obviously with the Trinity Junior Department. And just always loved playing with other people. And there was something about that communal music making which I just knew that was something I always wanted to do. And I never really thought, right, well, should I do music or should I do something else? It just seemed very automatic in my mind. I suppose it was only really when I was 16 that I decided it was definitely going to be violin rather than piano. At that point, I was equally good on both, but the orchestra I suppose, lure made me think, right, well, it's got to be the violin because that's what I want to be doing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we'll have your next track, shall we, Katherine? So what is it and why?
Yes. So this is this was the soundtrack to my upper sixth year, Bach's St Matthew Passion. I mean, what an incredibly powerful and epic work this is. And I used to listen to the first CD in particular of this 3 CD set almost on a loop. And it was my first encounter, I think, with period instruments as well. So that was sort of something quite new. But I just love the so many bits I could have chosen from this work. But I love the grandeur of this opening. It sets the scale of the whole piece and the building of what is to come. It sends shivers down my spine every time.
Oh, right, so apologies for the typo, but it's St Matthew Passion by J.S. Bach. No, it's not that one. Here we go. Okay, sorry, I felt like I was cutting that off in its prime there, but
I love that when the chorus comes in. It just it really does set the tone for the whole thing.
It's beautiful. Do you happen to know what Comte ihr Tochter helfen mir klagen means?
Oh goodness! Now, Sarah, if I'd known you were going to ask me that, I would have looked it up. I should do, shouldn't I?
Well, so should I, because I did do A-level German. But I know, come your daughter, help me something or other. Perhaps we'll see if anybody else knows at the end. But anyway, it's
come on, Paul, you're bound to know that one.
Okay, so. While you were at the Royal College, at what point did you sort of start maybe thinking that you might teach, or did that come afterwards? Or
well, again, like quite a lot of my decisions in music, it sort of happened a little bit by accident. I'd sort of got to my final year in college, and friends were sort of talking about doing postgrads and various things, and I had no money to fund this, to fund a postgrad, and so I didn't really consider that as an option. But just around the same time, a temporary teaching job came up at Bedford School, and of course, being from Bedford, it seemed like very opportune thing to come up. It was actually for the head of strings at Bedford School. It was temporary because the chap who was there was just taking a sabbatical, so he was having a term off, And so I applied for the job, got it, and thought, well, I can go back home. I know everybody around, and that'll be a sort of perfect temporary position. But I had a fantastic time. It was, I was teaching boys from 8 to 18. I had my first viola pupil there, having never taught or even played the viola at this point. So I very quickly learned to ask him the questions about what he thought, what he was doing, rather than trying to provide too many of the answers straight away. And I taught chamber music and helped out with the orchestras and did class violin lessons with the they were 9-year-olds, maybe a bit younger actually. And so that sort of started the whole thing, and everything just sort of followed on from there.
Wow, it sounds as if you were almost slightly thrust in at the deep end there, but perhaps that's the best way to learn.
Yeah, it was slightly, but I suppose it helped that, all the planning for whatever the groups and the chamber music groups were doing was already in place. So I didn't have to come up with, big programs for anything. I just had to turn up and teach them, which actually just felt fairly easy to me at the time. I probably made dozens of mistakes, and I'm sure it's not how I would do it now. But yes, I did just sort of take it as it came, and it did seem to come quite naturally at the time. It's
brilliant,
quite reassuring.
Well, it's time for your next track, Katherine. So what are we going to hear? In fact, I think you're cheating slightly. You've got 2 tracks next, haven't you?
Yes, I am cheating, but one of them is very short, and I have cut the first one down to just the final 20 seconds or so, I think it is. I couldn't go through this without having some unaccompanied choral music. And until I went to Oakham as a music scholar, which you mentioned at the beginning, I had been in choirs, but I had very limited, in fact, no real experience of singing in a church choir. And this was a complete revelation to me. And particularly the early unaccompanied music, I've never heard anything like it before. And the sort of spiritual nature of it and the connection I still have to a lot of that music has been very strong. In addition to that, it would also be very remiss of me not to mention the importance of about 4 or 5 years when my son was a chorister at St John's College in Cambridge. He went at the age of 8, and we had the most extraordinary time as a family, going to his services, trying to get there at least twice a week to hear him sing in this most beautiful, intimate chapel. And even though sometimes there were only sort of 10 parents there, it was the most incredible atmosphere and close-knit community that one of the closest communities I think I've ever experienced, and friends from there that will keep for life. So the 2 pieces I've chosen, the Amen from Parsons' Ave Maria, which I think is divine the way it unfolds, and then a very special piece which St John's sing every year on Remembrance Day, and it's very short, and it's to the poem for the Fallen by Douglas Guest.
Well, I think the recording that I have got of the Parsons is actually the St John's College Choir, but I don't know whether William's actually singing in it. But anyway, we'll we'll hear it anyway. Okay, I hope I've chosen the right bit as well. But anyway, we'll see. Right. Beautiful, Katherine, both those choices. Yes, absolutely amazing. So you've begun your teaching career. Had you done any teaching while you were at college at all, in a sort of to prepare yourself?
No, I hadn't. Again, it's not something I had planned to do. My plan was to audition for orchestras, get into the Berlin Philharmonic, of course, and then spend the next however many years playing fabulous music under fabulous conductors, which I have managed to do in a slightly different scenario. So no, I hadn't done any teaching at college, and so it really was just the first job that I got in Bedford that was my taste of it.
Okay, so then what happened?
Well, because I knew Bedford and the people there, I was quickly asked to be a tutor on the one of the youth orchestra courses, which I had left only a few years before, it seems. So I became a tutor on the county second orchestra, and spent the holidays doing that. I carried on teaching at Bedford School and also later on at one of the girls' schools as well. So I sort of quickly filled up my part-time teaching job to become pretty much full-time. Bedford was where I met my husband, Howard, and we got married in the school chapel there. And then just after William was born, he got head of geography job at Oakham School. So we very happily journeyed up to Rutland to make our family home here. I had two young children at the time. Well, no, I had one young children, another one very soon afterwards. So I wasn't really doing any teaching at that time, but that soon sort of followed once the children were a little bit older. In fact, I think Lucy was 6 months old when, not even 6 months, I think 4 months old when I was asked to do some teaching at Langham School. And I said, well, it's a bit tricky because I've just had a baby. And they said, oh, don't worry, just bring her along. So I did, and there were, I think, 2 pupils there, and I brought her in the car seat. She sat in the car seat, listened to the violin lessons, and then we went home again. So
wow.
She was brought up with my violin teaching.
I was going to say that goes a long way to explaining why she's now such a fabulous violinist herself.
Well, yes, she did. She was very keen from quite an early age to explore the violin. So and I couldn't put her off.
Oh, lovely. Oh, well, it's time for your next piece of music, Katherine. So what is it and why?
Yes, well, anyone who knows my musical taste will know that this list would be entirely incomplete if there wasn't any Brahms on the list. Brahms I had fallen in love with as a teenager. I played piano music. I played one of the violin sonatas, the G major violin sonata, in my teenage years. And I was lucky enough to hear Tasmin Little playing, not Brahms actually, but she did a concert in Bedford in my teenage years. And I was hooked, and I'm still hooked on Brahms. I can't get enough of it. I don't think there's a single piece of Brahms that I've heard that I don't think is fabulous, which I think is quite a rare thing to feel about a composer. And there are so many pieces of Brahms, I could have had just 7 pieces of Brahms, I think, on this list. But I had to choose one, and I thought, well, it's got to be violin concerto, really. I mentioned earlier that I was very privileged to have some fabulous teachers, and at college, you would mention my principal teacher was John Ludlow, again, a fabulously generous man. I studied the first movement with him, and performed the first movement in my final recital. So this piece has a very, very close place in my heart. But I've actually picked the beginning of the slow movement for this. So not one of the great violin moments at all, but of course the oboe. I just adore this melody. And, you know, feel quite envious that the violin never gets the entire melody. But I think it's just one of the most gorgeously crafted tunes.
Lovely. Okay, I shall. So yeah, it's the opening of the second movement, isn't it? Okay, that's absolutely gorgeous.
And some orchestra members may remember that a few years ago I attempted to learn to play the oboe, and I did a grade 1-a-thon, and I managed to struggle through. The examiner had the audacity to say I should have added more dynamics. I mean, how on earth people do dynamics on the oboe is beyond me. It was incredibly difficult, but it was kind of that moment in the Brahms that I always imagined in my head before I put the oboe in my mouth, and sadly the two things never got anywhere close.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's quite a big ask, isn't it?
Huge ask.
Yeah. But no, absolutely gorgeous. What I'd like to move on to talk a little bit more about now, Katherine, is sort of more top tips, really. What I sort of wanted to ask you was whether you ever get stage fright, and if you do, how do you deal with it?
Yes, I used to get terrible nerves. Not so much with piano, because you're sort of hiding behind a great big thing and nobody can see your legs shaking so much. But yeah, all the time with violin, and bow shake is just the worst thing in the world, and it happens, just too many times to all of us. So I didn't have a very good technique when I arrived at college. Sadly, I had quite a lot of tension in my arms and shoulders for all sorts of reasons. But it was down to my my teacher's patience, but also the Alexander technique, which kind of saved me. And along with that, it was just learning to breathe that really made a huge difference. I think string players in particular, string players, I mean, you know, wind and brass players do it all the time, so they have to control their breathing. But string players don't. And we so often play and sort of find ourselves holding our breath without even realising. And that's just not a good recipe for good playing. So the Alexander technique helped a lot, which I still use just to sort of centre my body and feel balanced and without tension, and then breathing. So those are the two main things, but also an underlying deep knowledge of what you're about to play. I think nerves really kick in when you feel like you don't actually feel confident in what you're about to play. So some of that can be made better by thinking of the physical requirements, but I think good knowledge of what you're about to play, feeling very centered in your body and without tension, and then breathing.
Right, so got a combination of physical and mental preparation, basically. Is what
absolutely.
Right.
Yes,
got
absolutely.
Got it.
And also that mental preparation is knowing that actually the people who are listening to you are not there to listen to your mistakes. They're there to enjoy the music. They want to have a nice time. So actually it's, and I remember very distinctly my violin teacher, John Ludlow, telling me that, you know, quite bluntly at one point when he felt my self-conscious nature and my nerves were getting the better of me, he said, it's not about you, it's about the piece of music, the composer and his intentions and what that is about. And that really helped because it took the focus off me as an individual, and as if everybody was going to be criticising me, and actually helped me focus on music itself.
Thank you very much. That's great advice. Right, it's time for your next piece, Katherine. What's it going to be?
Yes, well, again, there were two pieces actually that when I was making this list absolutely had to be on there. The Bach was the first one, and this was the second, Schubert String Quintet. I first heard this when I was at college. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know it before I got to college. And I was lucky enough to hear it at Queen Elizabeth Hall with the Alban Berg Quartet and Heinrich Schiff playing. They did a whole series of Schubert. They did all Schubert quartets. They did the Trout Quintet, not in one night, I hasten to add, and this string quintet in a series of concerts. And I went to every single one. But it was this piece that absolutely gripped me, and the whole audience was just totally silent. That moment in a concert hall where nobody breathes because the atmosphere is so extraordinary. And this goes back to my love of the cello as well. So the two cellos together in this opening movement, the cello tune that they get. The violins later do get it, but it somehow has a little bit more magic for me on the two cellos. So having heard it live, I hadn't had the opportunity to play it, although I did get together with a group of friends for my 40th birthday to celebrate with champagne and Schubert.
Oh, lovely. Right, let's hear it then. So
just so joyful.
It's
it's like a little ray of sunshine. And I forgot to say that I think the viola pizzicato to accompany the two cellos is just brilliant. And just comes through so beautifully on that recording.
Yeah, wonderful. So Katherine, in the introduction I mentioned about music and young people and the impact of it on their other subjects and educational work generally. Why do you think that music is so important to a child's development?
Oh, well, goodness, we could have a whole hour, I think, just on that, couldn't we? I think, well, there are so many reasons. There are sort of reasons that, that it encourages them to think in different ways. It makes connections between the brain, the physical and the emotional part of the brain, that so few, if any, other things actually do. But as well as that, it gives children confidence. They have to learn patience as well. We all know how difficult and demanding any instrument is, and to learn an instrument it requires, even at the earliest stages, huge commitment and concentration, and physical coordination. But when they get to that moment when they think, oh, I can play this now and I couldn't before, whatever level it is, whether they're a pre-grade 1 or post-grade 8, it's that moment when they feel success and belief in themselves that no one else has given them. They've had to work at it themselves. Nobody, I tell my pupils, I can't do this for you. You're the one who has to do it. And they have to learn that. And it's a long journey as well. But when they can get there, that moment when they suddenly realise they can do the thing they've been trying to do for however many weeks or months is very powerful. And I think gives children a huge amount of confidence.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's so important, I think, and hopefully, with everything that's going on, it won't impact too much on people's ability to access music and get musical education.
Yes, it's a very precarious situation we're in at the moment, and it is extremely worrying. In terms of my own teaching, I've been very fortunate to be able to keep my teaching going throughout this time online. I've only had one pupil who has felt unable to connect with the online lessons. But I know that's not the case in other parts of the country. I know teachers who have lost 50% of their pupils, and we can only hope that we can get back soon and encourage new beginnings for new pupils as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katherine, it's nearly the end of the interview, would you believe? That's gone very quickly. Yes. So it's time for your last choice. So what is it and why?
Well, this is a bit of an emotional one because it very nearly didn't make it to the list. As you know, I changed my list at the last minute when I realised that I couldn't live without Marla. I was toying with other things, and Marla had to be on there. And this piece goes back to, again, my teenage years and a very important period of my life involved with the Bedfordshire Youth Orchestra. And again, some fine teachers and most importantly, the conductor of that orchestra, Michael Rose, who has been such an important influence on me and many other young musicians. Huge supporter of music education. And I was unbelievably lucky to play some extraordinary pieces with that orchestra. Just too many to mention, but The Rite of Spring, I've never counted so hard in all my life. Some Peter Grimes movements, the string horsey interludes from Peter Grimes, Shostakovich symphonies that I'd never heard before, which, you know, as a teenager really hit these moody, powerful button. And Marla 2, which is an epic piece. Involves choir as well as orchestra, vocal soloists, and offstage brass and percussion. The first movement alone, I think, is 25 minutes long. I think Marla says in the score that there should be a 3-minute at least pause between movements for both orchestra and audience to absorb what has just happened. And it's exhausting and exhilarating, and it goes through such a range of emotions, this piece. I was lucky enough not just to play this with the youth orchestra, but to play it in the Albert Hall in London. My brother was singing in the choir, so it was a hugely powerful moment for me. And I've chosen a little extract from the last movement, which after, you know, an hour and something of playing, absolute exhaustion, emotionally, physically, and then get this.
Wow. Well, should we see it? We'll hear it. Let's hear it. Oh, sorry, it cut it off there. Off there quite abruptly.
Teasing everybody to go and listen to it later.
Absolutely. I was saying that's the first thing I'm going to do when this is all over is try and find a performance of that, because you've introduced me to it and it is phenomenal.
Yes,
so,
I actually did get goosebumps listening to that.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly powerful piece.
Yeah, I should say that this is being recorded, so and also if anybody wants details of any of the pieces afterwards, then just let me know, or we can get those to you. So yeah, that's thank you so much, Katherine, for being our first guest.
That was a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Slight guinea pig, But yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant hearing your musical choices and hearing more about your musical life. And so